According to my mind, drug policy should be based on zero tolerance, focusing on prevention, treatment, control, and aiming to reduce both supplies of and demand for illegal drugs. And I'm convinced that the UN drug conventions are the best tools and means available to achieve these aims.
The only country in the world ever to legalize marijuana is the United States. Nobody else has ever done that. What's happening in Colorado is new in the history of the world.
When I speak across the world and talk to very intelligent, smart people, many of whom agree with most of us that drugs should not be legalized, many of them still think, well, there isn't much we can do about it. This is inevitable. It's starting in the U.S. and it's spreading. We must push back against that. We must push back against also the second thing, which is a new corporate industry whose goal it is to addict more people. And the reason that's their goal is because that is how they will make money. I mean, it's very simple. It does come down to money. We must also push back against the false notion that somehow legalization equates to social justice. That the only way to have a compassionate, forward-thinking drug policy is if we try and legalize, regulate, control drugs like cannabis and have compassion for those who want to use and will continue to use even in the face of destruction. And also this goes along with the notion that cannabis does not kill you or that it is harmless. That is, of course, something to push back against. And finally, this idea that science or scientists, the forward-thinking, science-based notion is to think that legalization is the way to go. Remember, the same people said this about tobacco 100 years ago. Now, some people think that we found out tobacco was addictive or caused lung cancer in the 1950s or 1960s, which is when the first government in the world, the United States, acknowledged the link with lung cancer and tobacco. The first government in the world to do that, and that was in 1964. What a lot of people don't realize is that was 50 years after we knew about the link between lung cancer, death, and tobacco. It wasn't that we discovered it in 1963 and then a year later a government came out, the first one in the world, and said that. We knew about it for 50 years. And we were seeing the exact same thing with cannabis today. We have known for quite a while the addictive nature that 1 out of every 6 16-year-olds will become addicted to marijuana. Those who ever try marijuana will become addicted to it. Now, later in life, if you're an adult and you try or you delay use, that's about 1 in 10 or 1 in 11. And the simple reason, as all of you know, is that the adolescent brain is essentially under construction, right, until age 30, right, between 25 and 30. 15 years ago, if you were to tell a scientific audience that a growing population of kids are ingesting cannabis upwards of 90% THC, you would have been laughed out of the room by those scientists who study the issue. Why? Because over 90% THC doesn't exist in smoked marijuana. It's unstable. You can't turn that into a joint. But now technology has advanced in that you can, with a little bit of butane, extract THC from cannabis to turn into a wax, put it at the end of a needle, combust it, inhale it, upwards of 90% THC. And this is a product that's being sold in hundreds and hundreds of outlets in the United States today. We know the risk on mental health. Sweden gave us the first landmark study in the mid-1980s of the link that we first discovered between schizophrenia, looking at tens of thousands of Swedish conscripts, the link between schizophrenia and marijuana. And right now in my country, in the United States, we have a silent epidemic of mental illness. We also have a silent epidemic of cannabis addiction, which often accompanies the mental illness. Now, many of you have heard of the horror stories coming from the United States in the last 2 years with regards to mass shootings and mass domestic terror plots. You look at every single one of those shootings, and I'm not going to make a causal link because there are often multiple factors coming involved, but you look at every single one of those tragedies, and you will find two things in common with all of them: mental illness and cannabis. We've learned that casual users of cannabis now, we are seeing changes in the brain that we only saw in animal studies, we're now finding in humans. And so this idea that if you only use it occasionally, it's okay, science is now telling us that that's not the case. And we know for the fact that most kids who use cannabis also use alcohol. You know, there is an unfortunate meme in my country right now that if only we legalized cannabis, we could provide the safer choice for kids between cannabis and alcohol. And that has absolutely no scientific basis, but it is one of the leading reasons why the majority of Americans believe in legalization. The only way to make money in this business is if you target children. Okay? You will not make money if you are targeting adults in the business of addiction. So, you know, anybody that tells you that this global war on drugs is a failure and so therefore we need to allow responsible adults, you know, of course, only responsible adults to use drugs in the privacy of their own home or in a sanitary condition that the government can provide, that is a fantasy. Because that is not what global legalization is about. It is not about letting adults in the privacy of their own home smoke cannabis once a month, folks. That is not what it is about at all. It is about hooking the next generation of kids, because that is the only way to make money. When you look now, and I invite you to give the United States deeper scrutiny when it comes to this issue, the intersection of Wall Street and cannabis has never been greater. And right now, the number of people who see the green, and when I say green, I don't mean cannabis, I mean money. When they see the green, there's nothing stopping them. Not public health crises, not anything. And so when somebody asks you, well, what's wrong with just a little cannabis legalization, you should ask back, well, it depends how you feel about creating the next tobacco global conglomerate. Because, folks, you all know that they are recycling the advertisements that they said smoking cigarettes as medicine. Remember, that was what they said in the 1950s in the US and the 1960s. They said doctors choose this brand of cigarette because it's more healthy for you. All of these same claims we're hearing for cannabis today, you don't find those advertisements in the US anymore. That's true. Where do you find them? Well, you find them in West Africa. You find them in Southeast Asia. You find them in China. You find them in South America. Don't worry. These global industries are still making billions and billions, and they want to add cannabis to their production line. We now have the first pre-rolled marijuana cigarettes in the world, courtesy of the state of Colorado. We now have items like sodas and ice creams and candies that totally appeal to young people. And folks, when I show them these colorful images and these cartoons and all these different things, their eyes widen. Well, folks, we know that's called scientific marketing. We have to understand that this is about targeting young people. And now we have evidence that the third largest tobacco company in the world is now mass producing these new M cigarettes. These are vaporization where you can conceal your cannabis so you don't smell it. You wouldn't know that it's cannabis. These are in electronic cartridges that are also used for tobacco cigarettes. So you can claim, if you have it, this isn't for cannabis, it's for tobacco. And they're manufacturing and investing in companies that produce both cannabis and tobacco electronic cigarettes. And so do not fall into the trap that the only choices to deal with drugs or cannabis are legalization on the one hand or throwing people in jail for low levels of use on the other hand. Those are not your only choices.